Okay, so this is chapter 11. This is on interpersonal conflict and conflict management. We're turning the page from the lying, and we're going to conflict management. These are the objectives in the chapter to define what interpersonal conflict is, and we'll start with that. What is interpersonal conflict? Well, obviously interpersonal, between two or more people, and we all know what conflict is, I think. It's how is it interdependent? It depends on both people. Just like the TED Talk speaker talked about the fact that lying was interdependent because there had to be a person to believe the lie. The same is true with conflict, even more so. If I come in and I say something that you find offensive, Cole, and it really doesn't bother you, or you really don't feel like having an argument or a conflict that day, you just might just let it go. And then somebody like Heismer might say, hey, wait a minute, you can't talk to me like that, or it might just bother him more. Whatever the reason is, it's between two or more interconnected people. It's interdependent, influenced by both parties. And often it's because maybe your mutual goals are incompatible, or possibly one person sees the other person as interfering with their goals, whatever their goals are. And it's not, there's a myth about it that says you always want to avoid conflict in relationships. That is not true, because sometimes it's not better. Sometimes it's better to have that conflict. There's a myth that says if you have a conflict in a relationship, your relationship is in trouble. That's not always true. Sometimes it can actually strengthen a relationship if there's a conflict and it's resolved, let's say, properly, because you can delve into an issue that's come up between you and the person you're in conflict with, and you can kind of bring it to light and kind of get your feelings out there and settle it. Sometimes it can be damaging. I mean, sometimes it can damage a relationship. And it can also, one of the myths about it is that its conflict is always going to bring out your negative self. That's not true, although it can. It can. Some of the issues, maybe there's a conflict in goals. You know, maybe you want, and the one they used in the book that I think is actually a really good example, is that you may want to go to a different college than what your parents want you to go to. That's a really, really common issue with people your age. Sometimes there's a question of the allocation of resources. You know, what are we going to do? You know, where are we going to go this weekend? I want to go here. Well, we can't go there because we want to spend our money here. You know, where do you spend your money? Do you spend it on going to Canopy Lake Park for the weekend, or do you spend it on textbooks? That's a pretty good. That's a pretty good example, I think, of allocation of resources and the issues that can come up. Happens a lot with married couples or couples that are living together because, you know, those resources are theirs, the two people who live together, or three, whatever the situation is, in a roommate situation or whatever. Also, sometimes it's about decisions, and sometimes it's about behaviors. Somebody does something, and they use the term social allergens, which are like things that might be bad habits. You might think of them as bad habits. Somebody who maybe showers at night and not during the day, and it bugs somebody. Or maybe somebody who drinks or drinks to excess. And different severities, different levels of some people, to some people, they'll be a lot more lax about something. To other people, it will really bother them. And it depends on who the person is that you're going to be in conflict with. Again, something that really bothers one person may not really bother the other person. There were 6 issues that they talked about in the book. This was from a study that they cited in the book, and they said there were number 1 issue in relationships was about intimacy issues. Number 2, this is among couples, by the way, was power issues, possessiveness, or maybe inequity in the relationship. I don't know if any of you have been involved in this, but you might at some point in your lives be involved in a relationship where maybe it's all about one partner or all about the other partner, and maybe it's selfishness, or maybe it's position, maybe it's the context you're in, but people feel that there's a shift in power, or maybe there's an inequity in power, and they want it to be a little more equal. Third issue that came up was personal flaws. Somebody who might have eating habits that the other person found disgusting, or drinking habits is a big one. Number 4, they called it personal distance in the book, but it was really about the allocation of time. The examples they used were all about the time. And example might be a young lawyer who has to spend a ton of time at his firm because he's new, or she's new, and so she's working for a big firm. She's going to be working 80 hours a week, and her partner's at home and thinking, well, what am I doing at home? Why am I not spending more time with this, with my mate? And it can cause a lot of trouble. And I know somebody who, big firm lawyer, just like that, working his 80 hours a week, and his wife was at home with the kids, and it was like, why are you never home for the kids? Not thinking about the fact that he was doing it for the good of the family, not seeing it that way, just seeing her own situation, being stuck with the kids. I think people who work at jobs that require them to be out at night and the non-traditional types of jobs, they run into that a lot. Social issues, people argue about politics, they argue about parents, they argue about maybe a difference in values, things like that. That comes up as number 5 on that list of 6 issues. And then finally, there's distrust, which frequently in couples, that means, maybe there was cheating involved in the past, or maybe one member is just jealous. And so it becomes an issue as a conflict. Sometimes you'll find that jealousy comes up in a relationship, and it shouldn't be an issue. I mean, there's no real jealousy, there's no real flirting, there's no real reason. It just goes back to the people who are involved in the relationship, and maybe one of them is just generally distrustful and just has trouble establishing that trust with other people. And so the jealousy emerges, and possessiveness. We're going to get to that because frequently that will lead to, or not frequently, let's say sometimes that leads to violence. We'll get to that a little bit later on. So here's a chart of conflict and interdependency. As relationship interdependency increases, they find, so does the importance of the conflict, whatever the conflict is. And the more important the relationship is, the more important the conflict is. How does this make any sense at all, Maeve? I'm sorry, say that again?
Yeah, can you say that again?
Sure. As relationship interdependency, which is the need or the want or the desire for the two people to, the better the friends are. The better the friends are, or the more romantic the couple, or the more serious and important the relationship, the more important the conflict becomes.
I'm not really sure.
Okay. I will tell you one thing that'll happen, or may happen, is that when a couple gets married, then you're faced with a lot of decisions. If you're living together and you get married, probably less so. But if you're not living together and then you get married suddenly, I know that most marriages let's say not most, but I think the statistic is still 50% of marriages end in divorce. But the intent of marriage is to stay together forever. And what will happen a lot with young married couples is, particularly if they haven't lived together before, is that every decision that comes, or every potential conflict, and there are a lot when you live together, you know, which TV show do you watch, you know, who picks up after who around the house, who cooks the meals, who cleans, who does this, who does that. Once you get kids, it's like who's got how much time with the kids, all of this stuff. Um, but when you're newly married, it's easy to think whatever decisions we make in this first year are going to be decisions we're going to live with for the rest of our lives. So that becomes a lot more important with every decision. Does that make any sense to you, Maeve?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. If you had a so this is a real situation. Now the reality of it is you can always change your patterns and you can always come to an agreement about things once you get beyond the first, you know, once you get beyond that first year of marriage, or even within that first year of marriage. Um, but the conflict does happen. It is a source of conflict in new marriages. The idea that this is the decision we're going to make. You know, whatever we say, I'm going to be picking up underwear for the rest of my life. You know, that sort of a thing. And it is a real thing. If you had an argument with about going to see a movie with somebody that you were just dating like the first or the second week, that would not be a big deal, would it?
No.
Probably not. Maybe it would be. I don't know. Depends on the person. But the idea is that later on, if you had, let's say you had a dating partner who always picked the movie, always got to see what they wanted to see, that might grate on you. That might bother you a little bit, right?
Definitely.
And what's that?
I said definitely.
Yeah, and if it's a long-term relationship, which one would think would be more important than the short-term relationship or the new relationship, that would bring a little more intensity, right? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's the point of this. Just like we talked about on a continuum, how you talk differently and you have different expectations of your interpersonal communication with the waiter than you do with your best friend or with your mom. Your conflict is a lot more important when it's with your mom than it is when it's with the waiter. Does that make sense to you? Maeve, you still there?
Yeah, sorry.
Let me use a different example. Let's say there was an issue with problem drinking, and you saw somebody from your school that you didn't know very well, and you saw him a couple of times, and he was out and he was just drunk, and you know, if you're more comfortable, we can fast forward into the future by 5 years when you're all legally of legal drinking age and you're seeing him in bars, or we could say it's at teenage parties now, your choice. But if you saw somebody and he was inappropriately drunk a couple of times and he wasn't a good friend of yours, you might have one opinion. But if it was a really good friend and they were inappropriately drunk, you might have a different opinion. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
And so if you wanted that person to stop, the person you might not know that well, it might just be, oh, he's so annoying. I wish he wouldn't do that. But with the person who you're closer to, it might be like, I really don't want him or her to act like that. And that becomes a greater conflict. You see how that the importance of your relationship You see how that, in that instance, the importance of the relationship makes the conflict a lot more important?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll move on from there. If anybody has any questions, we can continue to talk about it. This was about, we're running a little bit late for this, so we'll skip this, but really quick, well, we won't skip it completely, but really quickly, viewpoints that you see on TV, when characters argue on TV, are they arguing about real life conflicts, or the same types of conflicts you have in real life, or are they completely foreign? Let's go to Ashley on that one.
Can you repeat what you said?
Yep. When you see somebody having a conflict on television, whether it's Homer Simpson or whether or not it's somebody from Modern Family or from whatever other show you watch, if there's a conflict, do they mirror the conflicts that you would have in real life, or that people would have in real life?
Yeah,
Okay.
I would assume so.
Yeah, sometimes they're a lot more absurd and a lot more, a lot of times they're more absurd for dramatic or comedic impact, but basically they're the same conflicts. They're the same conflicts, the same types of conflicts. So yeah, that's basically enough about that. So principles of interpersonal conflict. Conflict is inevitable. It's going to occur. It's as inevitable as communication itself. It can occur in all communication forms. I think we might all agree that one of the worst types of conflict is online, because you can't read nuance, you can't read tone, you can't, as the person who's making a statement or sending a message, you can't look at the other person's face to see how they're responding and whether or not they get what you're saying and the tone that you say it. And a lot of people are just not as polite online as they would be face to face. Why are they not as why are they less polite online than face to face, Jaden?
Because I feel like the other person can't take as much action when it's over the phone. Like through the phone, they can't like say like it's like a fight or something. They can't take like physical action against them if they're saying something about their family or something.
Yeah, okay. There seems to be a number of things with online communication that's just, it just really brings out the worst in people and the most aggressive. And I think it's trying to make strong points. I think it's not being able to control your or having no nonverbals to work with. That's why I truly hate emojis, but I do think that they're useful, and that, sometimes you'll put a little LOL or a smiley face to show that you're just kidding, and that sort of thing. But generally, they're so emotionless that people want to be stronger with their words, and often they become more hurtful. And I think also the form itself, because it's so rude, I think people are more likely to be rude. But I think, Jaden, your answer is a good one. Conflict can have negative and positive effects. Negative, obviously, you can increase your negative feeling towards somebody. You can fight unfairly. You can spend a lot of your time and your energy having a conflict about nothing, and or about something that's not that important, but it just gets very negative, gets very ugly, and it's a time waster. Or it can be positive, because you can examine issues that maybe you were burying before. Something that was really bothering you, but it never really comes out until it comes out in the conflict. And you and whoever you're having a conflict with, you face it, you confront it, and it prevents it from festering. Festering relationships. Now, from a workplace standpoint, there's always a question, if you're a manager, if you know that there's a conflict between underlings, there's always a question of, when do you step in, and how do you deal with conflict, and how do you get them to deal with conflict? And there are some times that people say, you know, you just always step into conflict and nip it in the bud. But then other times you really don't have that opportunity, and it can become a problem. And it can lead basically to, you know, both people um, hurting their professional image, even if one is basically correct and one of them is basically not correct. The argument itself and the argumentativeness is what people start to remember. So it's definitely something that you, as a manager, are going to want to be looking out for if you become a manager in your lives, and probably you will. And it's just definitely something that you want to be able to look out for, and you want to be able to teach yourself to help people get over their conflicts, teach yourself to get over your own conflicts. Online and face-to-face conflicts, just what we were talking about. How can you make online conflicts more positive? Naelis. How would you make an online conflict more positive?
How would you make an online conflict more positive?
Right. If you had an online conflict with somebody, how would you try to make it more positive? Nihiles, I know. Is it Nihiles, right?
Yeah.
All right, good. I'm never going to get that. I've only got a week left.
It's okay. A lot of my teachers that I have like for a full year,
Okay, good.
they never get it right, so it's fine.
I'm glad. So how would, if you were in an online conflict with somebody, have you ever been in an online conflict with somebody?
No, I have not.
Okay, probably because you're so polite. You probably don't get pulled into these great crazy things. But if you did, one of the first things that people recommend, and it's probably one of the best strategies, if you really have an online conflict with somebody, is you take it offline. You tell somebody, look, let's talk about this face to face. For a lot of reasons, but a lot of reasons people will, when you change the time and the space, they'll just calm down. Or you might just say, hey, let's talk. I'm going to send you my number, or why don't you send me your number and I'll call you. And that way you get that exchange, you get you get that exchange, you get that you know, you're understanding how people are responding to you. Obviously, it's a lot easier to tell when someone's responding to you face to face than on the phone. But the phone, it's a lot easier to tell how someone's responding to you than if they're just online and they're just words. So the other thing that people obviously would recommend if you're in a face-to-face conflict is the, you know, acknowledging the other point and, you know, doing it that way. You know, I respect your intelligence and I understand your point. And then you go on, but of course what happens frequently is somebody says, I respect your intelligence and I understand your point. And then, you know, up come the capital letters, up come all the, you know, kitchen sink stuff. And it doesn't really, online conversations just have a real potential for getting out of hand quickly. Principles of interpersonal conflict. Sometimes they focus on the, interpersonal conflicts can be about content, or they can be about relationship issues. Has anyone ever had a conflict with somebody and then afterwards thought, that was really not about whatever the topic of the conflict was? Let's ask Courtney.
Like what, they're getting mad at you for something like stupid and you think it's like about something else?
Yeah, well, yes, that's a real common one with, I think, particularly with teenagers.
Yeah, happens.
And they're mad because of something that happened the week before, or because an ongoing relationship thing have you ever heard that there's a parable that they use for marriage? When they send you to marriage counseling, you might, or not marriage counseling, but they have this thing called pre-Cana I think it's Catholic Church calls it pre-Cana, when they'll send to a couple that's going to get married and they'll basically have kind of pre-counseling And one of the things they talk about is this analogy of a pebble in a shoe. Have you ever walked with a pebble in your shoe?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody has. And as you know, you have a pebble in your shoe and you walk across the room, you know, it's a pain, but you know, you're only going across the room. But if you had to walk a mile or 2 miles or 3 miles, that little pebble is going to really, really hurt after a while, and it's going to cause it's going to cause more and more pain as you go on. And so that analogy for marriage is basically says if there are little things that are annoying to you and you don't deal with it, then you're going to have more pain down the road. Does that make sense as an analogy?
Yeah.
Do you see how that works in conflict with interpersonal conflict between two people?
Yeah.
You might, I guess it says that you might be arguing over the choice of the movie, but the real argument is not about the choice of the movie. The real argument is about the pebble in the shoe.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you've got unresolved issues in the relationship, and so you're just angry at the other person. So that happens a lot. It happens in the workplace where you might have two people who are just rivals. You know, maybe they're just both ambitious. They both want to get, they both want to get promotions. And so one of them might run down the other one's work product, or might be critical of the other one's work product, and vice versa. I've had it happen in class when I taught speaking, where I had one person would be really, really critical of another person's speeches. And it got to the point where, you know, I had to talk to her because I really didn't think it was about the speeches. I thought it was about her dislike of the person. I don't know if you've run into that in class, but you'll run into it a lot in the future. So that's how we can focus on content or relationship issues. Interpersonal conflict is influenced by culture and gender. We'll go over this quickly. It basically says it's different cultures, different things are important. I mean, a lot of times your value system influences both the way you argue and what you argue about. So the example was, the cultural issue of, Japanese more likely to want to compromise I think there's a fairly famous story. I think it's a Korean jet, but it was an Asian country. I think it was Korean, and the idea was in the hierarchy, the pilot is never to be questioned by the crew. And one time they're flying in the cabin, and the pilot missed something. He was just having an off day, and members of the crew wouldn't correct him, and they wound up crashing into a mountain. And it led to changes in the Korean piloting, their version of the FAA. They basically put in new regulations that basically said, if you think the pilot's wrong, say something. And so they had to basically change these regulations not because there was a written rule, but because there was an unwritten rule in the Asian culture. And I think it was Korea, but I'm not 100% sure. And I think we saw that recently with the two rookie cops in Minneapolis. You all know about what happened in Minneapolis last week with the fellow who got killed. I'm going to assume that's a yes. But you had two rookie cops who were on their first or second day, and they didn't stop the veteran officer who was kneeling on the guy's neck. They didn't stop him, and I think one of them said something and was kind of rebuffed. But there you've got that culture of the senior officer, is the boss, and they have no say, and they don't really push their seniors, and obviously the result was awful. But I think that's the same thing. That's a subculture of, and I wouldn't say it's all companies, but I certainly think that it's true with police. Is the veteran officer is not to be questioned generally out in the street. And obviously, in that case, it had a disastrous result. Anyway, so sometimes it's cultural influence will affect conflict in a relationship. Sometimes certain topics are going to come up and going to create issues. The nature of the conflict is influenced by, I'm sorry, topics are influenced by culture and gender. Some topics are a bigger issue to some than to others. Nature of conflict, same thing. Certain cultures, the way women are treated would not be a big issue. But obviously, United States and a few other countries, it is a big issue about how women are treated. So somebody might say something that in one culture is an insult and in one culture is not an insult to women. Conflict strategies are different by culture and gender. One thing the book stated was Black women are shown in studies to be a lot more direct and more control. They have a controlling strategy. They want to control the argument. They want to tell you exactly what's going on with them. And then white women are a little more indirect. So different conflict strategies, and also organizational norms. You know, some organizations, some businesses. Steve Jobs was famous at Apple for being somebody who encouraged conflict during his first stint as the boss at Apple. And then after a while, that led to a poor corporate culture. It wound up with him getting canned as the head of Apple. And then later on in his career, he came back and he had changed his management strategy to a lot more, one that encouraged a lot less conflict than his first time through. So different organizations encourage conflict because they think it's good for competitiveness. They think it's good for productivity. Others would rather avoid conflict, and they think a calmer work environment is a better work environment. And finally, there's gender influences. We have a ton on gender influences. If you look at page 292, there's all kinds of differences between the way studies that show all kinds of differences between the way what different genders and how they fight and what they fight about. I'll let you read it. It's on 292. I know we've gone over an hour, but we won't go too far over an hour. I want to take a look at this picture. It's, if you read the book, they say that when wives discuss problems and propose solutions, conflict resolution is more likely. When husbands do the same, they are seen as just trying to solve the problem and jumping ahead. Heismer, can you defend that?
Can you repeat it again for me?
Sure. You get a case where if one gender proposes a solution, identifies the problem and proposes a solution, you know, kind of a bang bang, a solution is more likely. If a woman does it, it's more likely. If a man does the same thing, it might prolong the conflict because he is judged to be just trying to solve the problem. Now, obviously, we're talking about percentages of males and percentages of females, but why do you think? So you propose the solution, and you say, look, we've got a problem with this. Why don't we do this? And you're in a relationship with a woman, and she says no, and you're just trying to solve my problem. Versus the woman who says same thing. She identifies the same problem. She proposes a solution. The man says, and the man's more likely to get it to agree to a quicker resolution of the problem. He's more likely to say yes. In short. Why do you think that is?
They most likely will say yes because they don't want to like get into like an argument. I don't know.
Maybe. Anybody else got one? Anybody? I think that it says that men have a different style of conflict resolution, a different way of thinking. So what the woman, for the woman to propose, to suggest a problem and then propose a solution quickly is a very, considered to be a conflict resolution style favored by men. Therefore, the man would be more likely to go along with it because it just kind of fits into the male mindset. Now, again, we're talking very broadly here. Everybody's an individual and everybody's different, but that's a possible reason for that. Does that seem like it makes sense to you, Natalie? Hello? Natalie, you still there? All right, this seems like a good time to break. Why don't we'll pick this up tomorrow. We'll also do, the final chapter? The chapter 12, we'll also talk about that. We'll pick them up both tomorrow. Is that good? Great.
Yeah.
All right, I'll see you then. And again, Thursday we'll do something, and then Friday we've got Friday we've got a couple of quizzes, and we won't meet in class. So we'll see you then. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.